Welcome to Movers and Shakers. I'm Aris Maragoudakis, Director of World Paper Money at Stack's Bowers Galleries. On this segment, we interview innovators, groundbreakers, risk takers, and market makers. I have somebody here with me today who is all of those things and more. Devin Hipp, Vice President of Stack's Bowers Galleries. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Aris. I'm happy to be here.
We had a really exciting week here. You've been doing the Professional Numismatist Program. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Absolutely. This is something that ended up spawning from about 7 years in doing numismatic education in general. The ANA called me in 2017, I believe, and asked if I would be able to come out and teach an intermediate grading class for their summer seminar. I got my start professionally in numismatics in a more profound way than just being a collector because of the contacts that I ended up making at my first summer seminar in the year 2000. So I was 12 years old, I believe, whenever I went there. It was July of 2000. And it was an unbelievable class of professionals that hilariously kind of came out of that time there. We have, several people that are, leading grading services or have, really significant places in the coin business in general. And we all had our first year at summer seminar in July of 2000. So I was sort of retroactively looking about where my real big breaks came in my career. And a lot of them led back to summer seminar whenever there were numismatic professionals that took time out of their own busy schedules to really go and teach the younger people about what they knew so that they could also advance in their careers. I sort of look at numismatic education now whenever the ANA called me to come do intermediate grading there, as I look at it almost as my own form of community service, really. Like if I can end up teaching a lot of younger collectors to end up being, to become dealers or just really sophisticated business people just in general,
right.
If I can teach them those skills, they'll go out and have above average incomes that they'll hopefully take into their local communities. They'll spend the money at small business. They'll be more significant taxpayers for the municipalities, which will end up filtering to schools and roads and different things like that. So my overarching 10,000 foot view on this is that if I can help people make above average incomes at a younger age, they will hopefully be better members of their community.
I think that's not only important, but I think it's very generous. When you think about opportunity just in general, I think it's important to pay it forward, which you're clearly doing here. And I know that there's not just people from the continental U.S. that attend these events. Is that right?
That's correct. Last year, we had a student that came from China that had gotten the application from whenever we did our press releases, through our email blast. This year, we had a student come from Saudi Arabia and showed actually an innovative way that he was able to overcome some local commerce obstacles to be able to transact business. So it's really interesting seeing younger people figuring out ways that sometimes they use methods that just don't occur to us to be able to use in an effective manner. But particularly for our program, to expand a little bit more on the previous question about how we arrived for PNP, I was helping instruct for Whittercoin University as well, which started in 2021. And there was sort of a need of whenever the students were aging out of the program after they hit 21 years of age, of like, where are they going? Like there was, the instruction stopped there. So it was either they go back to summer seminar or, we were sort of losing them in the shuffle of, people just aging and growing up in the coin business. So whenever I started at Stacks, we had an initial conversation about, how could we get involved in numismatic education in general? Mm-hmm. And what it really morphed into was, why don't we concentrate on young professionals between the ages of 18 and 25 and help give them marketable skills to be able to become sophisticated numismatic professionals? Not only from like just a general community building angle, we sort of want to see how we could end up building the coin business at large and what we want to deal with in the next 25 or 30 years. And I think a lot of that goes back to, making the people that I want to do business with in 25 or 30 years. So, you can wish all day long and, nothing's going to happen, but until you actually start doing something, then you can actually make a difference to see the world that you want to see in 30 years.
Right. I noticed from looking at the people who come here to speak at these events, right? And you talk about legacy, right? There's been some really big names in the business that were probably the Devin Hipps for you as you were growing up.
Sure.
And I think you're putting into practice some of what you've experienced, but you're also looking at the board and saying, well, how can this be better? And when you mention some of the other programs where you've done some teaching, I look at it as like, yeah, I mean, like those are obviously groundbreaking things for the hobby. And now you're taking those foundations and that building and you're building blocks on top of it, and you're giving them the next step, which, as I'm sure you've seen over the years, I've seen it, we've all experienced people who come in and out of the hobby because there's a break point where they're like, all right, well, what do I do here? How do I overcome this obstacle? And, in an industry where, you may have some reservations about growing your book or growing your network, you may not have the people to go to for that. So I think one of the coolest things that you guys do is you just prepare people for what this business is.
And honestly, too, not to cut you off, but like we've seen various areas of collectibles that have largely died off in the last 40 years because the people that were running those areas of collectibles were not willing to share their knowledge to a younger generation. There's one particular hobby that was very frequently done with coins that has seen a tremendous lack of activity recently because generationally the dealers were not willing to share the knowledge to help more people coming up. So I always viewed that as a warning sign as far as unless we do something, we could fall that same direction.
Sound the alarm.
Absolutely. So I think, again, it's about, paying it forward to enable these, people to be able to do something significant with a career at a younger age. But also it's sort of self-preservation for us too. Like I need customers to sell coins to in 30 or 40 years that are educated buyers. And unless I'm going out and doing it along with a number of other people that are qualified to also teach and lead the way, that's not going to happen.
Right. Now, maybe you could share something for people that only frequent coin shows, because I do know I've seen behind the curtain now what this event is like. This is the second straight year we've done it. So, I mean, there's been quite a many kids that have come through here. So I got to kind of tap into how vast the youth audience is for our field. But
yes,
if you go to a regional show, that may not be too evident based off what you're seeing when you look around. So has things like this kind of opened your eyes to maybe say, all right, well, look, the situation's not as dire, but that's why we're doing this now, because we need to foster this while it's here, and so it doesn't dissipate.
Correct. I was actually surprised whenever we did Winter Coin U in 2021 we had 25 students there, and the numismatic professionals that were part of running that event, none of us knew any of them. What we had discovered is that there was a very active community online between Reddit and Instagram that all of these younger people had connected and started to trade amongst themselves, trade knowledge amongst themselves, in general, socialize in the digital medium. And a lot of that was really a result of COVID as well. Since, actual coin shows were not happening, people needed to meet in some sort of fashion, and that ended up becoming on social media online. So we were all shocked whenever we met all these people and it's one thing to just gather people that know about coins or have an interest in coins. The most surprising thing from that first week that we did that was the depth of knowledge that these people had at a much younger age. And I think part of that was naturally we live in an information age. There's a lot of information available at people's fingertips.
Right.
But the way they absorbed it and they were practicing it was way more advanced than I was at their age. So, most of me is thrilled. Part of me is kind of scared that, like, wow, these kids are way more advanced at their age than I was. But it keeps me, it keeps all of us on our toes as far as constantly promoting excellence in what all of us do, because we have this younger generation that's kind of pushing us along. So to come back to your question as far as concerns, at coin shows and stuff, yes, for a very long time, we wouldn't see these people. After we did that first event in 2021, out of the 25 students, I think I saw 15 of them at A&A a few weeks later.
Yeah.
And you would think that, well, maybe that's perhaps some residual activity from, that event in general. No, we saw them show after show after show, and I have several business trading partners now that came from that event. I have coworkers here now that came from that event that I met in 2021. So again, it takes years to kind of get these projects rolling. to end up getting that critical mass of younger people coming through that, benefited from the event and then actually contributed to the numismatic marketplace. But every single time I've done an educational event for numismatics, I have new trading partners at the next shows. They join a lot of their colleagues that I had previously taught that are doing business in a much bigger ways. And it's been really encouraging, especially the last 5 years, seeing how many younger people are entering this market in sophisticated ways and intend on staying.
Right. I think you hear the stories, right, where like growing up, you hear about like what your grandpa did or what your dad did with the paper route and how he innovated. And you're like, wow, like that was really smart. But then you hear some of the stories that we've heard this week from some of these kids, and you're like, that's just a whole nother level, a way bigger audience. It's really impressive. It is kind of scary to some degree. So like, well, how soon till I get left behind? I mean, I exited out of a PowerPoint earlier today, and I couldn't figure out how to get back in.
Yeah.
And one of the members of the people said, "Oh, you hit this button," and I was just like, "Man, this is a perfect example of where things are heading."
Yeah.
But looking ahead, right? We're going to do this program again next year. What type of advice do you have? Because we get so many submissions and there's so much interest. Like, what are some of the things that you look for when you're reviewing applications? Is it experience? Is it passion? Is it, did they work under somebody that you knew, like a reference? What are some of the things that someone can do to stick out? Not to give anybody a cheat code or anything.
But no. Yeah.
What does stand out from the pack when you're looking at hundreds of applications for something like this?
One of the biggest indicators of a successful applicant as far as that translating really well to someone attending the program and finding it useful is intent of their career journey. And what I mean by that is, we'll have a lot of people that will apply that are, intermediate to perhaps advanced collectors that, they intend to do a career somewhere else, which, hey, that's great. And we definitely need those people to be bidding in our auctions and buying from us, on a retail basis. We need those final collectors. For our particular program, with it being, professional numismatist program, our intent with this is to cater to people that are career-minded for numismatics. So whenever we look at these applications, we look at skills also outside of numismatics that'll translate pretty well. Understanding data or statistics is always sort of interesting to us, along with technology. But in general, we like to see people that have some sort of track record of a career going towards numismatics. And I know that there's a number of, of applicants from, perhaps last year or the year before or this year that applied, and they didn't necessarily demonstrate that intent of going towards numismatics. And, at Stack's Bowers, we absolutely support anyone that's interested in numismatics. In particular, for our program, we're looking for people that are wanting to make a career as being a professional numismatist. So that's what we really try to look for whenever we're going through these applications for this. So previous work experience helps. Sometimes specialized interest shows a sophistication in numismatic skill. That's something that we look for too. And yeah, just in general too, being able to professionally communicate gives some sort of indication that you would be a good representative for our company in general, or just a good representative as a numismatic professional in our industry.
Just to touch on one of the things you mentioned, you were saying skills that translate, right?
Yes.
Like, I think, growing up, my father was in sport car distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Zero numismatic relation there. None. But the hobby itself does work similar in terms of passion and how you collect, why you collect, how you buy, how you sell. So that's kind of really close to being on the nose in terms of, a crossover. But let's say for somebody completely out of the field that might come across this video, let's say they're in sales or they're in marketing. Have you seen crossover from other professions in general that are not numismatic related, where someone has come off the street, say someone who sold sneakers or someone who worked at Bloomingdale's, that started to work under a coin dealer, found some success, and then just took off? Is that something you've ever seen or experienced? Like, is there hope out there for someone, not necessarily hope, but is there an opportunity for someone who's like, man, I kind of hit the ceiling here at this job and I want something new?
100%. And that's sort of the dream, right? Is having people that come from outside of numismatics into numismatics in a professional sense. numismatics in general has been a very traditional hobby for ever since the kings started collecting coins from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So I mean, we've been very traditional in the sense of like we have a certain way of doing things, and technology has been one of those areas that has not been entering numismatics in general at the speed that we would hope. One of the ways that we can see innovation in numismatics in general would be having people coming from outside of our industry with some other industry experience. Recently I've actually started to get into trading cards because my son started a collection who's 8 years old, and it's become sort of a family affair for us. And one of the things that I love about the trading card space in particular is that it has the widest demographic as far as age, gender, financial background, ethnicity. It's wild. I've never seen something as diverse as a card show. And whenever you look at a coin show, we have a lot of, we have a lot of space to be able to include that in our industry as well. And so you have to kind of think about, from an interaction standpoint, why does that happen? Why does that happen on cards, but it doesn't necessarily with coins? And so, I think one of the challenges for numismatics in general for us is going to end up being finding some sort of interaction to bring people coming in at different, stages of their life. I think that's really important.
Sure.
But, also one of the ways of being able to hopefully facilitate that is having people coming from outside industries that bring fresh ideas in. The coin business needs, fresh ideas and innovation, and hopefully we're going to start seeing that sometime in the next, 5 to 20 years.
I remember at my first show, it was a Chicago show, and it was the PCDA Paper Money show.
Yep.
And my cousin, she called me and she's like, I heard you're going to your first show. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go work for your dad. Just check out
that's exciting.
the situation. And she goes, yep. Well, it's the final frontier. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And she's like, these people don't have websites. And this was, some time ago. And I just, I've been at Stacks now since 2015. And I know that you have experience being here a while before that. So just seeing the strides that just this company has made, but then, you span it across the board, and it's like we have internet auctions, we have, people selling via social media, there's Facebook groups, there's this and that. And I think that we're starting to slowly benefit from that. And hopefully, that continues to perpetuate, and the values of things will, attract more buyers and more interest, and people will see the opportunity. And I think that's, when I talk to friends about what I do, they're so fascinated because like, wait, what? Like, that's worth what? Like, you guys sold a coin for $1 million? Like, how does that happen?
Absolutely.
What does that mean? It's sticker shock. And we see it with art, like art, sells for a big painting, $30 million, and it's all over the news. And when you look at coins, or banknotes, this is art. This is what that is. It's just translating a little differently. And I do think over time we'll see that.
One of the areas too, just to touch on that really quickly. So your primary specialty here is, world banknotes.
Right.
World banknotes is one of my favorite areas of numismatics, actually, because there's still a lot to be discovered.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good research that to still be done on that. Even discovering new signature combinations for things. The interaction that I actually found with world banknotes was some of the best that I could find in numismatics. And one of the great things about it too is that there are a lot of countries that you can collect these notes in uncirculated condition for a relatively affordable price point. Right. There are some countries where you can buy a landmark rarity for $3,000, which is not a small amount of money, but to be able to buy a landmark rarity for an entire country, that's incredible value. Yeah. I had the most fun trying to find all the different signature combinations for French Pacific Territories 500 franc notes. And it came from, I had bought a deal and there were some notes in there. I used the catalog that traditionally is used by United States coin dealers. And whenever I went there, I had a note that had a signature combination that was not listed in the book. And I was like, well, what's going on here? I'm the type of person that doesn't like not having all the information.
Right.
So I very quickly discovered, the banknote book, which had all of them listed in there.
Yeah.
And that was very exciting to me. So there was an interaction aspect of being able to go and look at different auctions and try to find the signature combinations that I needed. And a lot of times these notes were, $5 to $30, depending on if they were uncertified or graded or, and of course I'm a degenerate collector. So I started looking for, the 5,000 franc notes too, with all the different signature combinations. So the interaction interaction aspect that I found at an affordable price point in a number of different things with world paper money was fantastic. It was one of my favorite areas for me to ever collect.
I think it was really fun to watch during COVID. It was May of 2022, and Chinese coins just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where to gain entry into starting to repatriate some of the Chinese coins was just, I mean, you were basically buying houses at that point for a lot of these guys. So we saw this massive influx of coin guys who were used to paying at minimum $5,000 for just a basic coin, buying these marquee pieces and driving the price up. And notes that used to sell for $300 are now selling for $3,000. And here we are some years later, multiple auction sales later, and that's still pretty much where these notes are at. And you start to then look at the board and say, okay, well, what's next? These are emerging markets. Where do you go here? And I think the passion that people can find connecting, whether it be because of your story or, oh, it's an animal vignette or it's my grandpa's from here. Like, there's all these cool ways that I think the general public is largely unaware of that, you know, things can change and things can happen. For you, I'm curious because I know that, you know, you said you went to a seminar and that was one of your first big events. You're one of the marquee people in our industry that people look at and they say, well, you know, I'd love to have a career like that guy. How did it start for you? What was the spark, or what was the first interaction where you were like, oh?
It's funny you mentioned that because there was someone here this week that hilariously had one single moment that he could point to that started his unbelievably amazing career. And I was actually fortunate to have one of those kind of watershed moments myself. I remember I took an interest in coins whenever my dad was working for the international company Siemens. And he would travel to Germany and Austria, and he would bring coins and paper money back. And I remember finding them whenever I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I thought they were interesting. They were coins and paper money I'd never seen before. Mm-hmm. And he happened to also have a 1991 Black Book of U.S. coins. And it was about this big.
Interesting.
And probably maybe that thick. And I remember having that in 4th grade, taking it on field trips or just in the car, reading about it. I remember looking at a Franklin $50 and an Eisenhower dollar in it. And they were interesting to me because they were all coins that I had never seen before. I'm a pretty visual person, and I think a lot of people in numismatics in general are. Yeah. I had that book, and none of the coins in the book matched the coins that my father had brought back, because naturally they were, I was in 4th grade or 3rd grade. I should have pieced it together that, the Swiss 5 franc note was not going to be in the U.S., coin book. But what it ended up doing was I started looking to figure out if there were coins that I could, try to buy or sell for my friends. And so one of my friends had a grandfather who had collected coins, and he had gotten a few pieces of buffalo nickels from him. And so I was able to buy a 1935D partial date buffalo nickel from him for $5, which was not a good deal. But that was like my first coin I bought. It was a U.S. coin that I'd never seen before, and that was really exciting. So that kind of started me as far as just a general interest in the commerce aspect of coin collecting. That was like my absolute initial moment. My key moment was my mother's father had collected coins in the 1960s, and he had collected them with his sons, my uncles. And he had found out that I was interested in coin collecting. I had recently purchased my very first red book. It was a 1998 red book, and it had better pictures. It had more information in general than the black book had that I had, and it was also more current. And I had been reading it and absorbing the information, but my grandfather had heard I was interested in collecting coins, so he had taken 10 mercury dimes out, and he put them on top of his microwave for whenever I came to visit. So I came to visit. I started going through them. I was super excited. They were the first mercury dimes I had ever seen. Yeah. The 9th coin out of 10 turned out to be a 1942 over 1 mercury dime that at the time was worth $250. Right. And the way I equated it in my 4th grade brain was that's 50 Star Wars action figures.
I would have done the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was the moment that I was like, wait a second. Like, I could give 50 Star Wars action figures for this. That was really interesting to me. And I could point to that moment as far as that piqued my curiosity of maybe there's something to this as far as transacting business and being able to just make any type of money. The second moment I had came very shortly after that, and I was talking to my godfather actually about my uncle and godfather about collecting coins, and he said, that's a mighty expensive hobby. And I'm the type of person that whenever I'm told I'm not able to do something, then I'm like, well, I'm going to go out and do that.
Yeah.
And so it was like a combination. Those two events, I think, happened on the same trip. And that's what propelled me forward for some reason. Finding that coin and being told that something might be really difficult. And that inspired me to be like, I'm going to take this coin collecting thing pretty seriously. And it really exploded from that.
Have you ever had a follow-up conversation with your godfather?
I did.
Hey, look what I did.
I did recently. Yeah, I saw them back in November, and I told my uncle, I was like, you're not going to remember this, but you had this conversation with me. And he laughed and laughed and laughed because it sort of worked out okay that, even though that he said it was a mighty expensive hobby, I went out and I was able to do it.
It's so crazy how, a conversation that's easily forgotten by somebody means so much to somebody else. That's happened so many times in my life.
1,000,000%.
And I love going back to that person and be like, hey, remember this? Like, this drove me to do this, or this.
Absolutely.
This is why this is the way it is. I think that's really cool. Another fun piece of how we might be connected is Siemens is the organization that sponsored my soccer team for 6 years.
Oh, really?
So anytime I hear that, I just go right back to soccer. I'm like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So since then, obviously, ups, downs, crazy experiences, recessions,
Sure,
booms, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have any stories about either, something that caused a hardship or a mistake that was made or a pivot you wish you didn't do that you think is still applicable today that people, should be aware of, or, anything along those lines?
Naturally in the beginning of anyone's pursuit of, doing something for a business or a career, especially if you're trying to do it on your own, capital is always a problem. And one of the ways, especially in the coin business, that you can end up earning opportunities to use capital is by developing really good relationships with dealers and doing good business over the years. As far as hardships or difficulties whenever I started, I know whenever I started my first company, my family, came from, good means as far as I had a very good childhood and, I never went without anything, but not to the point that, I could go to them and be like, hey, I need $20,000 to, start a company.
For sure.
And so I had to figure out how to be able to access capital or earn the trust of people to be able to start my business. And thankfully, I had developed a reputation as far as being a very straightforward business-like person and always following through with my commitments. I always did what I said I was going to do. And that lesson in particular, I would really pass on to anyone that's listening, in that it's something that I just take for granted because I was raised that way. I always just follow through on my commitments and my obligations. I never viewed it as, I had any other option on that. But it seems that in today's day and age, that commitment to fulfilling obligations that you meet is become more of a novelty, which is sort of strange to me.
Yeah, I understand.
But that unwavering commitment to fulfilling my obligations ended up ultimately earning me a lot of opportunities in numismatics, because whenever I went to certain people and asked for extensions of credit or just in general, they were entrusting me with financial responsibility, I had that reputation of always coming through for my commitments. And so whenever I asked somebody to borrow $200,000 and I gave a very good plan as far as this is how I'm going to use the money, this is how it's going to be more or less collateralized. It's going to be an inventory I'm actively trading. I'm happy to give you any type of information you need at any point. I'm paying you this much in interest. Will you trust me to use this money? And when I was 25 years old, somebody did that for me. And that enabled me to start my business. And it's really sort of a a long story as far as, having to earn that trust, with a reputation over a long period of time.
Sure.
But I think that's a pretty poignant story that if you keep at it, you're doing good business all the time, that whenever the opportunity comes up for you to do something on your own, you're able to do it because people will trust you with way more than you realize that they would. I've had more opportunities in this business simply on my reputation of being able to say, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and have 80 other people say, yeah, he does that. He does that 100% of the time. As far as like other hardships in general in the business, I've certainly had, other ones. Like, you always remember, it's always way more memorable whenever you lose money on a deal, or if some sort of transaction goes askew. Naturally, if you have some good principles of trading in general, as far as following through with your commitments, that doesn't happen a whole lot as far as difficulty of a transaction. But sometimes whenever you're trading coins, you just get it wrong. And if you're not losing money on some coins, you're not buying enough coins.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I think that's really pretty poignant. And it sort of lends to this next point of, there were a number of times in my career that I was presented with some sort of choice as far as like, should I buy this coin or should I not buy this coin? Naturally, it's always safer and more risk averse to not buy a coin. But my philosophy that I started doing was, I'll never know if this works unless I try it. And so when I started doing that, I had developed a pretty good set of skills to develop a really good gut instinct on things. And so I always trusted my gut instinct. And so I had something come across my desk. I say, you know what, I'll never know if this is going to work unless I try it. And more times than not, I was right. And, naturally you have the times that you're wrong, and you always learn so much from those mistakes. But what all the situations of where it went really right sometimes enabled me to have that confidence of, I'm capable of way more than I thought I was. And having that faith in my skills that had been proven from doing these small experiments over time of, I'll never know unless I try it, gave me the confidence to take on bigger opportunities in this business at a much younger age. I mean, as the time of this interview, I'm 36 years old. Like, that's an unusually low age to be vice president of a company in this sort of space. And a lot of that I attribute to being able to take those risks, those very good calculated risks at a younger age, and pushing myself forward to find out what was truly possible. And it's a really humbling experience, actually, whenever you look back at that and see I was capable of way more than I gave myself credit for. Yeah. And so, the mistakes hurt. You learn so much from them. But my general advice, for this is that you'll never know unless you try something.
I think one of the most important things you said was highlighting how you'll never know unless you try, because there's that doubt that young entrepreneurs have, or young people, or even older people in general. I mean, I still have it from time to time when I'm looking at something. It's like, well, do you swing the bat or not? And weighing that. And you said it right. Calculated risk is obviously much different than just risk. You're not rolling the dice on that. Like, you're actually looking at the facts that you have and making a calculated decision. That anxiousness or uncertainty or anxiety, you see it a lot, I think, in younger and unexperienced people that have the skill set or the talent to do what they're trying to do. Is there any type of advice you might have outside of just, take the shot, that you can give to somebody who suffers with it? Because I think that, a young guy comes to a coin show and he or she looks at the floor and says, well, I don't know anybody. Mm-hmm. And these guys, they're all busy, they're upset, they're slamming the table, they're arguing about a price. How do I? And I've noticed and I've experienced the older generation be so welcoming, but I feel like that's just, oh, well, it's easy to say that now. You're up here on stage having a conversation, but I think that that's really important for them to know and maybe have some advice that you've, tips and tricks that you've used in your career to be where you are.
I think it's what I would say in response to that would be a general piece of advice that I give a lot of younger people in general. I say younger, I'm 36. I feel like,
right.
I'm the same age as all of them, but actually, 20-year-olds are 16 years younger than I am.
Right.
My general piece of advice that I give is be an outlier. And what I mean by that is become exceptional at something or have some sort of trait that is unusual and noticed by everyone else as being different. Now, in numismatics, that could be, be an outlier in your knowledge of French West African banknotes, or even from just the strict commerce perspective of, you're a young person, be an outlier in doing quick, easy business with people and do what you say you're going to do. And, it's the reality of the world today that those attitudes are actually make people outliers. Be an outlier, because that's how you become noticed in our space in general. People take interest whenever they see people doing something different than how they do it, or something that makes them stand out from a group of their peers.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. So disruptors, if you're listening, we're waiting for you. Yeah, Evan, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. It's truly my pleasure. It's been a busy week, but it's been awesome to have you, and thank you for everything you're doing for the youth and for numismatists everywhere.
Thank you very much.